In the last video I decided I needed a bike rack for the car, so I had a really good look on the internet, and it turns out putting a bike rack on the Discovery is not so straightforward. First of all, the roof is quite tall, so getting a bike up and down on the roof rack is hard work. I did have a look at the ones that you can attach to a tow ball, but a lot of those would just prevent you from opening the lower tailgate. There are some other options that pivot down or swing out of the way, but to be honest, a lot of those look quite fiddly and cumbersome and flimsy, and it's certainly not something that I'd want to leave on the car full time. But I came across this, and I think I found the answer. This is the Terrafirma Spare Wheel Carrier. Now, I know it's not a bike rack, but what I really like about this is that it swings completely out of the way, which gives you full access to the tailgate. It doesn't require you to attach it to the tow ball, and it's just a lot more sturdy and less fiddly and cumbersome than some of the other bike racks that do swing out of the way or pivot down. It just has one simple lever which allows you to release the whole unit, and the gas strut means that it pushes out to the side really easily. Even if you've got a spare wheel and a couple of bikes on this, it still pushes out with minimal effort. The other thing that I really like about this is, unlike a lot of bike racks, it doesn't have big plastic bits on it everywhere. It's just nice, good quality metal, and it blends into the car really well. And this lever, it's reassuringly stiff, so you have that confidence that it's not going to come loose while you're driving. And if you want more peace of mind, they've even put a hole through the lever so that when it's pushed back into position, you can hold it there with a split pin or a lock. But to be honest, I've tested this a few times now, and this lever by itself is more than secure enough. The other thing that I think is really clever about this spare wheel carrier is that when it's locked in position, none of the components interfere with any of the reversing sensors, and they don't even interfere with the reversing camera either. Now, when you've got the spare wheel on there, it will obstruct your view slightly with the reversing camera, but it's still workable, which I think is quite impressive. So you might think it's a bit extreme to move the whole spare wheel onto the back of the car just for a bike rack. And I agree, it does seem a bit much, but it's not just for the bike rack. A lot of videos that I've watched about overland builds in the Discoveries, they very often use drawers and water tanks and a lot of stuff that goes in the back. And they very often get in the way of the winch, which allows you to drop the spare wheel. So by putting the spare wheel on the back, it just gives me a few more options for things that I might want to do inside the car at a later stage. There are a couple of things that you need to look out for if you do get this spare wheel carrier. First of all, they actually put the powder coating on the wheel bolts, and this means that your wheel nuts won't catch the thread. So I spent about 15 minutes trying to put the spare wheel on when I first got this, and I must have just looked like a complete idiot stood in the car park because I just couldn't get the wheel nuts on at all. In the end, I just gave up and threw the spare wheel in the back of the car. So when you do get this, make sure you've got a wire brush or something so you can clean the powder coating off the wheel bolts, otherwise you're never getting that spare wheel on. The next thing I noticed is they only give you 2 nuts and bolts to attach the main bracket onto the swing arm. Now what that means is if you've only got 1 nut and bolt either side, it creates like a pivot point, and then this bracket just rocks backwards and forwards. Now I guess what you could do is you could just offset them so that you've got them at diagonals, but what I did just to be sure is I put an extra 2 nuts and bolts in, so there's now 4 points of contact, and now there's no play or wiggle in that whatsoever. If you're a capable mechanic, you might want to have a go at fitting this yourself, but these bumpers can cost about £1,000, and in order to fit this you need to take the whole bumper unit off, you need to chop the corner off the chassis that sits just underneath, you need to drill some holes into the chassis and into this bumper unit itself, and for me there's just far too many things that could go wrong. It would cost me a fortune to put it right. So I took this to Avenger 4x4, it took them about half a day and they charged me about £300, which I think was well worth it. I know I've mentioned Avenger 4x4 in my other videos. I'm not sponsored by them at all, I just think they're decent guys and they deserve the recognition. So that's the spare wheel carrier in place, now I need to fit the spare wheel. Okay, so this is where I wasted a bit of money. I didn't realise until I dropped the spare wheel that it's actually a space saver, and God knows why it's a space saver, because I've been assured that you can actually fit a full-size wheel underneath the vehicle, but for some reason it's a space saver. So I pressed ahead anyway, tried to make it work, took the wheel to get refurbished and powder coated so that it matched the colour of my other alloys. And that cost me about £100. And then I realised you can actually buy a brand new Space Saver on a black rim with a tyre for about £110. Anyway, the problem is I shouldn't have stuck with the Space Saver in the first place. It doesn't look too bad on the back of the car, but it doesn't look great. It really needs a full-size wheel on there. And I think more to the point, I don't want to be on an adventure somewhere and be relying on a Space Saver to get me out of trouble. I want a decent alloy that I can do a little bit of off-roading in if need be, and also so I can do a reasonable speed on the motorway. So I found a Land Rover wheel on eBay which matches the alloys on the rest of my car. I got that refurbished and powder coated so it's the same colour as my other wheels, and now it's looking good. Okay, so this is the full-size spare wheel. At first I didn't think I'd need the centre cap with the Land Rover logo on, but without it, it just didn't look quite as good. So I got one of those off eBay. Something else worth mentioning is when you buy the Terrafirma Spare Wheel Carrier, it actually comes with 3 wheel nuts, but you might want to get an extra locking wheel nut. I actually bought a pack of 5 so that I could secure all the wheels on the same socket. Now when I was choosing the bike rack to attach to this spare wheel, there's loads of different options, and probably one of the most popular is the Yakima. And I did like the Yakima, especially the way that it attaches to the central wheel bolts rather than big brackets and straps around the wheel itself. The only thing that put me off with the Yakima was the big plastic grey and red detail that they put on there, which I think just makes it look a bit cheap. I'd much prefer it if it was just all in black, or at least just looked like it was all made of metal. So in the end I went with the Hollywood One. Now despite the fact that it does have a bracket and straps that go around the spare wheel, I actually do think it looks quite neat, and I'm more than happy leaving it on the car all the time rather than taking it on and off every time I want to carry the bike. The arms on the bracket actually swing away to one side, so it's nice and compact when it's not in use. It's really sturdy, and even though these arms are quite short, it carries 2 bikes really well. Another thing that's really clever about the Hollywood One is that the bracket can be offset by about 20 centimetres in either direction. Now that's really good for discoveries because when the spare wheel's on, it's slightly offset towards the driver's side. So when the bike's attached, the front wheel of the bike actually overhangs the driver's side by about 20 centimetres. So by offsetting the whole bracket, you can make sure that the bike sits central to the rear of the vehicle, and then you hardly get any overhang at all on either side. Now for me personally, I don't use the offset because what that would do is it would bring the whole bracket out to the side, and because I'm leaving this on when the bikes aren't attached, I'd rather it was more neat and compact and central to the wheel. So I'd rather put up with the compromise of having the bike overhang just a little bit. But if I was taking the bracket off and on every time I was carrying the bike, I'd definitely use the offset. So now that I've got the bike rack attached, it's time to go on another little adventure. I've actually got a few days planned in the Lake District. I'm going to be staying in a cottage this time rather than camping, but it's still going to be a really good chance to road test the bike rack because I'll be driving for a few hundred miles on the motorway and on country lanes. So stay tuned for the next episode. I'll see you then.